This is a pod. A pod about dogs.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Healthy Dog Pod. Today in the studio we have myself and Sophie as always.
Hi.
With us we have Vet Behaviour Team, Amanda Cole and Heather Chi. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Why don't we start off with a little brief introduction as to who you are, what you do as a company, and just lead us in.
Amanda and I are behaviour vets, and we met working at the RSPCA a few years ago where we were managing their veterinary behaviour department and helping rehabilitate dogs in the shelter, as well as offering support to patients who came to the RSPC vet hospital with behaviour problems. And since then we have been consulting. We offer in-home visits for dogs who have issues probably more emotionally and in terms of their mental health rather than the training aspect of things. So issues like separation anxiety, noise phobias, generalized anxiety. And we often find that people come to us when they find that they've reached a limit in terms of their abilities to manage a situation, and they're becoming quite frustrated. They've tried training, it's not happening, and then we're sort of the next stage.
So you're looking at it as well as a management and training element, which, you know, that's obviously where you've got a lot of experience in that regard, but you're also looking at it as like a medical perspective.
Absolutely, because we're vets, we can take in consideration sort of a holistic approach, including the physical well-being of the animal as well as the well-being, because we know that they're often very interconnected and it's easier to have that kind of wider perspective.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's really similar to what we work, well, that's why we work together so often. And I think that's something that a lot of people probably aren't even aware of it, or it's probably just becoming aware of, is the fact that the emotional response of the dog determines the behavior on so many levels. And just training alone is not always enough. It's actually this is where something that you guys definitely helped me in my learning was understanding the emotional response of the dog in terms of its effects and how its brain works and all of that cause and effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think sorry about my voice, I've got a cold. But I think there's a really major misconception that dogs that are what people would call badly behaved just haven't been trained properly or aren't obedient enough. Whereas what we find in the cases that we deal with is that the emotional stress or the anxiety causes the animal not to be able to respond in what looks like an intelligent way. So most of our clients are very, very, very smart animals, but their anxiety means that they can't learn in a given environment, or they can't process information normally the same way as a child that's being bullied at school may be very, very, very intelligent but unable to process information in a heightened emotional state. So we try and address their anxiety organically so that they can start responding to the world more normally and show how wonderful and intelligent they actually are. Yeah.
I think it's something that we see a lot is these dogs that we work with get branded as stupid. And a lot of these dogs are almost like hyper intelligent. They learn super fast, but they really focus in on one thing, but they really struggle with a lot of information all at once. And they get overwhelmed. It definitely takes its toll on their emotional response, and then their behavior is like the behavior that presents from what I see is the symptom. And trainers I think often fall into the trap of trying to train it out of them by treating the symptom. Whereas from what I can see with working with you guys is you're coming at it from trying to address the cause of why that problem's presenting in the first place.
Absolutely. I think it's difficult for people to understand that at times because their dogs can respond to training in specific situations, but they might not be able to generalize that training when they're feeling anxious or stressed. And I think a nice analogy is like, if you're having a panic attack on the plane, you're absolutely terrified of flying. If someone's sitting next to you and trying to ask you to do something, normally you probably would be able to respond to them quite well and in a rational manner. But if you're having a panic attack, you're not able to function in any normal kind of capacity. And we are sort of putting that expectation on some of our patients when we shouldn't be. We should understand that they're not thinking at all. They're highly emotional at that point in time, and we really have to be kind to them and empathize, because I think everyone has had the feeling of being stressed before. Even not, if you haven't had a full-blown panic attack, you do know how hard it is to be able to deal with things that you normally could when you're using your normal brain in a comfortable situation compared to when you're really stressed.
Yeah, that's, I think a lot of people are still reprimanding that, and out of fear of rewarding that negative emotional state, that panic attack, like you're saying. And I just still laugh at that, to be honest, because I always relate it back to, if somebody's having a panic attack next to you, you could either ignore it, and like the old myth would say, like if you pretend to be really confident, then your dog will pick up on it. Or you could punch them in the face, like correct it with a check chain. Or you could offer them a brown paper bag and go, hey, here's something to make yourself feel better, bring you out of that irrational, reflexive brain and start thinking again, rather than trying to train them in that moment. I think as a trainer, that's where I see a lot of people fall down, whether you're professional or not. I think the lack of education on that, or the lack of information out there on that, really has a big effect on how we handle problem behaviors. And for me, we see it every day. It's just cruel almost. Obviously nobody means to be, but because obviously it affects the person as well. They're often in a situation where they feel compromised, and they react almost they react out of fear and confusion and themselves. And then you've got two individuals in a situation that neither of them wanted to be in. It's something that I learned a lot from about how the dog's brain works, and it's not dissimilar to ours, is it?
No, it's essentially the same as what you'd expect a 1 or 2 year old human child's brain to be, and the dog kind of stays in that emotional and intellectual age its entire life, and that means that it can feel important emotions like fear and love and disgust. It's just not capable of some higher feelings that, when we start to prescribe them to dogs, start to get us into trouble. So they don't feel guilt, and they don't act out of spite, and they're not spending their entire life trying to manipulate the system to get a treat, or to be able to sleep on the pillow.
World domination.
Yeah, exactly. So I think in a lot of respects, society expects too much of dogs, but if we bring it back to the human equivalent, we know that a 1 year old child is going to get upset about a lot of things, and there's no kind of necessarily talking them through that. We just have to help them through it. But the society at the moment expects a dog to be a good dog. Like if you feed it and if you walk it, then it should be a good dog. And they place a lot of labels on behaviours which dogs don't have any control of. And I don't think there's anything that could make a dog a bad dog. It just means it's an anxious dog, and we need to help it. But
no, I completely agree. I feel like a long time ago, I was in a seminar with the APDT, and I was actually listening. This is the first time I ever came across you guys, and actually listening to Amanda speak. And she had two points that really resonated with me, and one of them was consent of the animal actually being in a situation. We put our dogs in situations that are very human, and expect the dog to understand it, tolerate it, and comply. And the other one, this one made me laugh, and I've used this example so many times since, was our perception of what a dog should tolerate in comparison to a cat. I don't know if you remember saying this.
Not entirely, but I could probably guess where I was going.
It was along the lines of, if somebody approaches a cat that they don't know and it takes a swipe at them, they'll go, oh shit, I'm an idiot. Cats do that. I should have definitely not done that. Whereas if you go over to pat a dog that you don't know, and it growls at you, moves away, or even takes a snap at you, you just pause and go, your dog's broke.
That sounds like me, but I would have said it more highfalutin.
It was, it definitely got me thinking, I know that much. And I was still learning about, I mean, I still am, but I was still, back then, very much on the fence in terms of positive reinforcement and correction. I just hadn't furthered my education. And you really got me thinking. I remember we sat in Kirsty's Sexual seminar a few years later, and I came over and went, hi. And because you got me thinking. And that's one of the reasons why we really wanted you in here today, because it does get people thinking about why behaviors are presenting the way they are through understanding them. And, I've been working with dogs for a while at that point, and I hadn't seen anything or heard anything like that made me think that way. And it challenged me. It completely challenged me. I didn't want to be wrong either.
You hate being wrong.
But it was so good. It was really good. One of the things that I'd love for you guys to go through is just an explanation between the difference between the thinking side of the brain and that reflexive side of the brain. Because again, that is something that I think a lot of people aren't even aware of how dogs think and how they learn.
Yeah, so when we think about dogs' brains, we have to look at their behaviour in light of what part of the brain are they using, and are they consciously making a decision about their behaviour, or is it coming from a more primitive part of their brain where their behaviours are going to be more reflexive or self-protective and unfortunately juvenile and automatic? Because when we're doing training, we obviously want them to be using the higher parts of their brain, which are a bit more evolved. They can take in information, they can think about it, they can make rational choices, they can remember from previous learning experiences, and they have to be comfortable and relaxed when they're in that space to be able to access that information. When we're looking at the more primitive parts of the brain or the danger part of the brain, they're not consciously choosing to behave in a certain way. They're going to be behaving in that way because they're having an emotional response, whether that's from negative stress, so things like fear or anxiety, as opposed to positive emotional stress. So if they're really excited or hyper aroused, in both situations, the behaviors that come from here are not usually going to be ones that we particularly want to see. So they might involve things like aggression, they might be behaviors which involve moving away from the danger. If they're scared, so flight or avoidance behaviors, they may freeze, which is a bit more subtle. Some dogs can also become so overstimulated, like what you were mentioning before, Ian, where they're not thinking, but they're very, very active constantly. They're not taking in information appropriately, and we're seeing behaviors which are a little bit excessive or out of context or disproportionate to the situation. And because all of those behaviors tend to be unwanted, there's usually a judgment based on those behaviors. So, it's easy for us to understand if a dog is trembling or hiding or shaking or moving away from something. We recognize that dog is scared and worried about the situation. But a dog who might be showing sort of more aggressive behaviors, there's often, negativity associated with that. We think that dog's being bad or disobedient or stubborn or naughty or dominant, when the dog is just trying to make the thing that scares them or worry them move away by being scarier and bigger. The best, defense is a really good offense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of dogs, a lot of people, they'll say to me, "Oh, my dog shouldn't be scared of that. It's half its size," or It doesn't matter, in my opinion. I'm scared of wasps.
Yeah, I'm scared of spiders.
I'm scared of slugs.
I'm not scared of anything.
I want to be Amanda. The dog gets to choose what stresses it out. And whether you deem it a stressor or not is completely irrelevant according to the dog. And yet, yeah, like a lot of people, maybe they'll go, oh, well, you shouldn't be scared of that, you pussy, and kind of drag it in and throw it in the deep end. And it's the same with I think with that hyper aroused brain as well. People go, I think they set themselves up to fail a lot. They'll, for example, they'll rev the dog up, and I think the classic one we see is when people have guests over, and they'll spend the first 10 minutes throwing the ball and chucking it around, and after 10 minutes they'll go, why won't the dog calm down? Because you've been running it and like spiking its adrenaline for the last 10 minutes. It's like feeding it sugar and then going, hey mate, why are you up there? Give it something to chew. These days I'm like, put the balls away when your guests come over and leave out something to chew, because nobody's ever picked up a goat's horn and lobbed it across your living room.
Maybe not to the parties you go to.
I want to know what parties you go to.
That's another podcast. But I think there's a lot of energy put into, trying to rationalise anxiety, and it's futile, because the definition is that it's, a bad feeling about something that isn't bad, and it's in the eye and the brain of the beholder. So we try and get our patients, owners, the clients, not to really focus on why the animal's feeling, a certain way, and don't spend 25 hours, trying to work out the origin story of the dog's anxiety. It's more about just listening to what the dog's saying and then trying to make it feel better in that moment. And another frustration is that rescue dogs are supposed to be anxious, and that's really frustrating for us, because they don't have to be anxious. Like, we understand that they've come from a situation that has bred anxiety into their brain, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be treated the same way as if we know that a dog was hit by a car, we'd still give it pain relief even though we know why it's in pain.
Yeah, it's been through a trauma, and you've got to treat it that way.
Yeah, exactly. But I think people treat emotional trauma so differently, in that if they understand why it happened, he was hit as a puppy, they think that it's a normal response for the dog to be afraid of all men after that, when the reality is, if the dog's treated, it doesn't have to be afraid. And that's something that we hit our heads against a fair bit.
Yeah, like people go, I actually did have somebody just the other day just go, oh, it's a rescue. Of course it behaves this way. So, if not help you, I mean, fair enough, you've accepted the situation, but your dog the quality of life for your dog could improve. And I think, this is something that I think we all see, is people wait for the behavior to affect them before they get help. And this is where, if we actually are aware of dog body language, how they're communicating and what they're actually signaling, we would have a better insight into how they're feeling. And, we call it the 4 Fs, don't we? The responses to stress. And fiddle behaviors, there's displacement behaviors, comfort behaviors, whatever you may call them. They are the body responding to a heightened state of arousal when that amygdala fires. And good or bad, like you say, Heather, it's could be something really that the dog enjoys, but it's still starting to behave reflexively, and we should at least acknowledge it and note it in our mind as to which way it's going from there. Is it continuing to escalate, or did it notice something and then settle? But even just that initial awareness of fiddle behaviors would be, for the general public, would be so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. If people start really watching their dog and monitoring for behaviors such as fiddle behaviors, or just dog body language in general, I think we're not very good. I mean, fair enough, we're not dogs, but we're not very good at reading dog body language. And so oftentimes when we're explaining things during a consult, suddenly it'll be like an owner's eyes are opening and they're like, oh my gosh, they do that all of the time. Had no idea what that meant. Just thought that was completely normal for my dog. And why would they know any different? Because that is probably what your dog is showing all the time. And if you haven't had any kind of comparison, you wouldn't know any different. But it just is completely eye-opening, and it's lovely that they are then able to feel like they're a bit empowered in terms of being able to understand how their dog's feeling, and then they can change the situation or help their dog out if they're struggling.
Yeah, and I mean, really important to highlight, I think fiddle behaviours, they are normal dog behaviors. They're natural. The dog will do them anyway, but you have to apply context. One of them is the really obvious one is shaking it off. You know, if your dog isn't wet and constantly shaking, that ain't normal, mate. Sort it out, like address it. But if it's wet, of course it's not. Well, it's not, of course, but likelihood isn't. It's a stress. It's not a stress response. So context is really important.
Yeah, I mean, almost every consult I go to, if I go through the fiddle behaviours and I say, you know, they're normal behaviours performed out of context. So humans fiddle all the time. And so a normal behaviour in a human would be to move your leg up and down. But if you shook your leg the entire time, you know, you're probably going to think Amanda's a bit uncomfortable, but she's not going to punch me in the face. You know, I'm not completely panicked, but I'm showing you that I'm uncomfortable in a situation. And the more humans can learn a dog's way of saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable right now, the more we're able to de-escalate the situation and start preventing dog fights and dog bites and, you know, preventing the things that end up in the news that shouldn't get to where they get to. So knowing that a dog that's mounting you, that's not a funny thing. That's a dog that's showing a stress behaviour, or a dog that's constantly licking its lips. That's not it, you know, doing a funny grin or a funny smile. That's it showing that it's uncomfortable. And the more we listen to those minor behaviours, then the more the dog can feel relief. You know, the same way as if anyone's had a 1-year-old child, as soon as they can start saying a word and you can start communicating with them, life gets a lot easier. So the more people who can start communicating with their dogs, then life will get a lot easier for everyone.
You start setting them up for a win. And I think it's the same with hyperarousal. I know that some people will go, oh, you're just pointing out how stressed dogs are, and dogs aren't always stressed. No, but hyperarousal is, you know, even if it's positive, you know, you start to see the dog arousal level go up. And I always say, like, the higher the arousal level, the lower the ability to really register and process information. And so say it's in a dog park and it's playing and you start to see its speed pick up and you start to see it get real intense. Play is a conversation between dogs. It's meant to be a back and forth. By stepping in earlier and noticing that your dog is starting to act reflexively, starting to not listen to the other dog's conversation, you start to bring them out, call them away, start to get their thinking brain active again. And just with some simple recall exercises, I just ask people to call your dog back regularly and get it to sit in front of you for 30 seconds and reward it, and watch the dogs go from this like wide-eyed monster staring at you to this dog that starts just breathing and relaxing. And instead of reprimanding it when it goes wrong, you can, by spotting these body language signals and keeping that dog in the thinking side where it can process information and really comprehend what's going on around it, you set it up and you up for a win, because you don't want to be reprimanding your dog either. Nobody calls us when it's going well, and they've always tried reprimanding first.
I think that sometimes that's what people think. They're doing the right thing by doing that until they know better. So it's a tough one.
A lot of what we do, all of us, is that proactive approach. Preventative care.
Preventative care would be the same. Like, that's what we as vets do, and probably you as trainers. Like, you know, puppy preschool, preventative care right from the start. For us, vaccination, we don't want to wait until, you know, the dog has parvovirus and then has to stay in hospital for a week afterwards trying to fix the problem. Why wouldn't we set things up to succeed in mental health as well as physical health and social health? If we can possibly make a difference, then's the time to do it, rather than after the fact. Then you've got a problem.
Yeah, and I think when somebody's called yourselves and us as well, you know, we will go in, and I think a lot of people may be expecting the problem to be solved, and
like this.
Yeah. But if that dog is carrying stress, if it's been going through this for a long period of time, and that's pretty normal, is this has probably got to a point, like I said earlier, when it's now become a problem for the person. The dog's probably been going through this for a while. It doesn't just magically get better. We do actually have to one of the things we encourage is a stress break, to allow it to recover, to go, look, your dog has been exposed to this high emotional state, this irrational state for so long. No, it's not thinking straight. And just like you and me, if I've had a real busy time at work and I'm under the pump, I need a break. I need to take a step back and zoom out and go, oh shit, I'm not actually thinking. Everything I'm doing right now is just a reflex response. And I'm just putting out little fires everywhere, but the house is burning down. Zoom out. And it gives, from our perspective, it gives people the opportunity to breathe as well. Even though they might want that problem solved right now. If you go, look, you don't have to throw your dog in the deep end. You don't have to go and reprimand the dog and stand there in a stressed out place that you don't even probably want to be in yourself and get in a shitty frame of mind. I think it gives everybody a better, more breathing space.
Yeah, I think, I think when we're called out to a consult, the picture that the client has is that Heather and I will come out with some kind of dog whispering wand, and we will be doing all this hands-on stuff with the dog and somehow, manipulating it into some type of magical dog. And the reality of what we do is we spend a few hours talking to the client and explaining actually what's happening inside the dog's brain, so that the client is then given permission to release and to take a break and to actually be the dog parent that they want to be. Because generally, before they've seen us, they've seen some people who may not be using science or current science as a method of communicating with the dog. And if we think about neurologically what that dog's been going through, it started off with an anxiety pathway that was maybe a dirt road, and every time it goes down that pathway and every time it's exposed to the trigger, whether that trigger be another dog or a person or being alone, and wasn't helped through that, then that dirt road becomes a highway. And so giving the owner the permission not to go down that highway and to take a break until we can get their brain functioning so that we can build new roads is actually, we find, quite a relief for our clients. They kind of exhale at that point, that we're saying, you don't need to do this. You don't need to bat your head against the wall every day because it's not working, because your dog's brain isn't functioning right now. So if we take a break, get it functioning, then all that work that you put in, you'll get a result, as opposed to asking your dog to sit 25 times a day and it only responding once. So.
And when we think of mental health, it's similar to other forms of long-term chronic disease management. If you have a diabetic dog, you are not going to be able to find the right dose of insulin and the right diet and the right level of exercise for your dog immediately. You're going to have to go back to the vet and check its blood glucose levels, experiment a little, see how it fares, fine-tune. It can take weeks, it can take months, and we're good at understanding that, if a bone's broken and a dog's had surgery, that it's going to take time to heal and that we're going to have to reintroduce things slowly. We're not just going to go, okay, your dog's had surgery, let's throw you in the deep end and go back for walks and runs 2 weeks afterwards. It's going to take time and we have to introduce it slowly, and it's exactly the same with mental health. We have to wait till the brain's in the right space. Has it healed enough? Is it ready to be exposed to things again? Going to be a long-term journey.
And that's where we step in afterwards as trainers, and we reintroduce the dog to the world at a pace that it can cope with without flooding it. I think one of the counter arguments I hear a lot is counter arguments against positive reinforcement is it works until it doesn't. And in my opinion, it works until it's flooded. Don't flood it. It's not that hard. If your dog is acting reflexively, you've exposed it to too much. And if you feel them forced to correct it, you've flooded yourself and your dog. What are you doing? Why? Go back, take a step back. Nobody's winning there. You put all that preventative work in and set it up to be able to be in a frame of mind that is ready to receive new information and learn. Don't then flood it and expect it to go in exactly the same situation and magically have learned a new behavior. It's, I think one of our other friends down in South Australia, they explain it like sand tracks. If you go down that route enough times, it becomes ingrained. And one of the nice things that I think you guys always say is they're synapses that fire together, wire together. It's they just, once that route has been travelled, you end up going down it again because that's the one you know. So as a trainer, working with you guys, we've got to go, all right, this dog is now in a frame of mind to learn, but that doesn't mean that it's magically fixed. And this is why I enjoy working with you guys, because you give us the best opportunity to actually succeed.
So I think today what we hear a lot about is the stigma around mental health, humans, but also in dogs as well. You know, a lot of people don't really believe that it's true. I just want to hear your insight to that a little bit more.
Science tells us it is true.
I believe
it. But yeah, I think people think that the dog's brain is so completely different than a human brain. But if you break it down, it's very, very, very similar. Like we have a part of our brain that's probably a little bit bigger and allows us to, want to watch TV for 10 hours in a row. But essentially the pure parts of a dog's brain is the same as the pure parts of a human's brain. And if we believe that humans can have mental illness, then we need to believe that dogs can have mental illness. And I think, the stigma around human mental illness is so extreme still, despite all of the efforts of, Beyond Blue and all that sort of stuff, that, people will still say you don't have depression, you need to exercise more and eat better and, change your lifestyle. Well, Ian Thorpe exercised more than anyone in Australia and ate better than probably anyone in Australia and still had a severe mental illness. So a lot of our clients, we see, one of the first things that they'll say is we walk him 3 hours a day. And we just, like, nothing's working. We feed him the most expensive diet. It's not about diet and exercise. It's about addressing, actually what's happening inside that dog's brain and allowing them time and space to heal, as opposed to wanting them to be obedient, because they don't have to be obedient. We want them to be happy.
Yeah, when somebody says to me, "Oh, your dog's so well behaved," I'm like, that isn't a compliment for me, if I'm honest, because my dog doesn't know how to lay down on cue. But the reason why everybody notices is because he's so comfortable in his own skin. Mm. He is he's a happy dog that is so comfortable in his environment that he doesn't present any problem and unwanted behaviors. This emphasis that, if we tire the dog out, we'll make them happy. If we run them into the ground, we've met their needs. I think if owners put emphasis on making their dogs feel safe, settled and comfortable, rather than training them how to sit and lay down, then we would have far fewer problem behaviors to address in the first place.
Yeah. Even a lot of people say, as you said, with walking, need to walk my dog this many times because society says need to take it to the dog park, need to take it to the cafe, but it's not necessarily the best thing for your dog.
Yeah, and it's not like that's not the natural state that most dogs want to be in.
Yeah.
They don't want to meet a million other dogs. They don't want to go to a million different countries where they don't know the language and they don't know the currency. They actually quite like their family and their home, and interesting smells when they're not afraid of what's going to come around the corner and scare them. So I think people confuse walking with enrichment. And
yes.
I want people to really look at whether what you're doing for your dog is enriching your dog, or whether you're ticking a box and your dog's actually going through stress to tick your box.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
That sounded a bit rude.
It's true though. People have their own perception of what the dog might like instead of listening to their dog.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in our consults, one of the things we ask is, what are your dog's 5 favourite things? It's quite interesting to see. People can recognise what their dogs actually like doing, but that doesn't always correlate to what their expectations of what a dog should like doing are. And so if they have pressure about taking a dog to a cafe or a pub or walking it X number of times a day, and then you look at their dog's 5 favourite things, going to a cafe, walks is not one of them.
Yeah.
Why have a dog? Isn't it to make it happy and be part of the family and do things that they enjoy, rather than what we think we as society should be doing with our dogs?
Yeah, for a long time I've been saying we get a dog to make us and them happy. The only way you can really do it wrong is if you consistently do things that cause you or them stress, and you either do it consistently or you start telling them off and getting stressed about it yourself. Like, that's how you do dog ownership wrong.
Yeah.
Because, if you are taking your dog out because you heard that they like walking, but it's having a shit time, and you end up telling your dog off, then you're having a shit time.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why are you doing that every night? Like, go and do something that you actually both enjoy. Or don't
that's
worry
the
about covering the
pressure.
concrete. Just do some smell things.
And that's the pressure of society, though. You know, it's like, how many times do you walk your dog? When do you walk your dog? Where do you walk your dog? And sometimes they just want to stay home. They just feel safe at home.
So do I.
Yeah.
Just actually taking it easy.
Yeah.
And, just going, you know what, I'm knackered. I'm absolutely knackered. And I just want to sit down and do nothing. And then when you look at your dog, you go, oh, look, it's 5 o'clock, got to walk him. He was asleep. If you're actually listening to your dog in that moment, he was asleep. There was no need to go and stir him up and take him out. It's just not necessary every single day. So one of the things that we do want to cover today is this misconception that you can reward a negative emotional state, such as fear. Please, Heather, tell us.
We need help. It
Shed
keeps going
some light.
around.
It's a myth that has to be busted.
Please.
I mean, if you've just been mugged on the street and your friend comes over for moral support and then says, nope, tough love, you just have to deal with it. Never mind, you've almost been beaten up, had your credit card, wallet, everything stolen from you, feel terrified now to walk again in the street. They just go, no, we're just going to let you deal with it. You'll be right. How is that going to make you feel? As opposed to if they give you a hug, they take you home, they give you a glass of wine and some chocolate and are there for you emotionally. Are they making you in the future more likely to pretend to be scared about being mugged in the street in the future? No. So why would we do that to our dogs? We want to try and make them feel happier. And, that's just the very basics of counter conditioning, changing your underlying emotional state from one of fear to being comfortable with something.
Yeah, like when we're working with the dog, from a behavior point of view, it's not the same as obedience training. We are trying to alter their emotional state so that they feel better about something. So when they see a trigger, we create a positive association, not them to want to feel aggressive. I don't really know how that got confused. I really don't.
I think because people are thinking about a dog behaving using their thinking brain and that they're making a choice about their behavior. And so they're worried that if they give a treat at that point in time, they're using positive reinforcement to make the behavior more likely again in the future. So if we can distill it back down to what part of the brain is your dog using, we'll be able to know whether it's appropriate or not.
So if the dog doesn't sit and and it's just stood there wagging its tail and you give it a treat anyway, you've not rewarded sitting. But if your dog is being aggressive and you give it a reward, you are altering its emotional state. You're actually making it feel better in that moment, like that brown paper bag with the human earlier.
Absolutely.
Yes. It's like giving somebody a beer if they've had a shit day.
Yes.
It's not going to make them want to have another shit day. Right, thank you for clearing that up. Hopefully that clears it up once and for all. On that note, guys, we are going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Why did I say thanks? I'm here all the time.
Sophie, the guest speaker today. Remember, folks, leave us your feedback in the comment section below. And as always, remember, a healthy dog's a happy dog.
Woo.
And that was the pod.